Hi, class. This week we will talk about contract negotiations. We will start by discussing some issues regarding negotiations, and then I'll explain the project that we will do for next week's class. As we covered in class, a contract is an agreement between two sides. As such, both sides have to agree to terms before a contract can be completed. This process is called negotiations. Contract negotiation usually involves two parties to the agreement or to the proposed agreement, and one party will make some demands and the other side will respond. And the role may reverse or it will continue on until a contract is fully negotiated with all the important terms included. Usually, it's good to be on the demand side because you can name your price, so to say. If you are on the receiving side, always responding, then you don't have as much leverage. Usually, in certain kind of negotiations, especially in buying and selling negotiations, the seller sets the price, and the buyer can sort of make a counter offer, and they settle somewhere in the middle. But this is easy when it comes to mathematical or financial negotiations. When it comes to certain other things, you might have to get creative. For example, if one side does not like the other side's control of certain objects or properties, then you may have to get into specifics on how to make arrangements so both sides can be happy. So, with this process, let's first understand that everything has value. Sometimes the value is monetary. Sometimes the value is intangible. It's easy to negotiate a monetary value. If you want something to be $100 and the other side, for example, over here, on the other side wants $50, then perhaps we reach in the middle for $75. But how do you agree on the intangibles? If you want a product to be made to be red, and the other side wanted to be big blue, what does that mean? Do we read somewhere in the middle to be purple? I'm not so sure. So sometimes what we do is if you're willing to give up your choice of red and end up with blue, perhaps then you will give up your choice of being 50 and let the price to be 100. This way both sides will receive something they want and then they meet in the middle per se. So this way the negotiation requires concessions from both sides, and that's why we're negotiating. A compromise is not always the best end result, of course, but if you really want to get the deal done, sometimes you must make compromise. Second, next we'll talk about strategy. What's the best strategy in negotiating a contract? That, of course, is depends on the specific situation and your personality. Some people like to wait and until the other side name a price and then they fight back really hard. Some people are more or less agreeable. If you're aggressive, however, usually you will push the other side more toward what they want. So there's nothing wrong with being aggressive as long as you're being polite, considerate, and willing to hear the other side's concerns. The first thing you need to be, in my opinion, is to know what you want. This will take a lot of thinking and a lot of research, so you can go into the negotiation session understanding exactly what you want. You don't want to go into negotiations, ask for something, but not sure why you really asked or what the value it is to you. So on the other side asks you to give it up and you're not sure what to do, or maybe you give up too easily and end up losing more than what you really should. For example, if the price of something is to be $1,000, but that's an arbitrary number, and when the other side come by and say, well, why is $1,000 good? Why couldn't we cut it down to 800? You can of course say that, well, okay, we'll meet in the middle, and then the price is going to be 900, like I illustrated above. but is that really a good result? Is 900 really what you want? So whether 900 is a good result or not really shouldn't be if it's between the asking price and the counter offer price. It really should be if 900 really the price you want to be at. Which then lead us to the second point, which is always ask for more in the beginning. There's just two, based on number one. If you had asked for 1,000, but you expected 1,000, you have no room to negotiate, and the other side will not feel very good that 1,000 is your final offer. On the other hand, if you had asked for 1,200 and the other side settled to, we end up settling at 1,000, then you still get what you want, but the other side will feel like they got a bargain because they bargained you down for $200. So they saved $200. This is especially evident when you buy a car or a house. If you guys ever had to buy a car in your house, you will always encounter a very high asking price, usually, not always, and then they will negotiate that. You might go into a car store and then expect to pay $8,000 for a car, but you see the price as being $15,000. The salesperson somehow figure out, or through talking to you, that you really want to only pay $8,000 for it, and he's willing to sell it to you for $10,000. It is still a little bit more than what you wanted to pay, but $5,000 on a $15,000 car is a pretty good deal, right? So let's write it out. If you wanted to pay $8,000, but the other side offers $15,000, and you meet somewhere more close to you at $10,000. Sounds like you're getting a great deal, but you really don't know because this might just be very much inflated. The car might really only be worth $9,000, right? And then they offer $15,000 as a sticker price. You end up with $10,000, more than what cars are worth, but you feel like you've gotten a bargain. And third thing that we need to care about, that's the first is the value, second is strategy, is some are the important factors that you should care about in a business contract. Number one is value. It's almost always is value. Business contracts is about money, so value is represented by some sort of value. And so the sales price, for example, which happened to also be the buy price, right? But sometimes you talk about other things of value, so things of value. For example, when you buy a car, the sales price you might agree to, let's see the above example at $10,000, but the car needs new tires. So maybe you can negotiate plus new tires. It's a thing of value, but it's not a part of the price. That usually is the first most important factor. The second most important factor usually is control. In business, control, it means almost everything after value. If you own the company and somebody wants to invest in your company, you don't want to give up a lot of control to that person because then it will no longer be your company, that you're not running it by yourself. And that becomes the issue most of the time. So you should try to retain control if you are the owner of a company and somebody wants to invest in it. On the other hand, if you are investing your money into somebody else's business, you want to have some sort of control, because if you don't watch what they do, maybe they take your money and run away, or they waste your money and you don't get it back. So control is a very hotly contested issue. And third is risk. Sometimes in business you can't foresee the risk, but if you can foresee the risk, you want to ask for a reduction. So for example, if you're buying a new car, or if you're buying a used car, and how do you reduce the risk? First thing you will probably do is look for a car of low mileage, because the higher the mileage, the more risk that it breaks down, the more the risk that it will break down because it's been in use for a long time. So to your benefit, if you're buying a used car, the first thing you probably should look for to reduce your risk is to buy a low mileage car, because chances are it's of a lower risk. But if you have no choice or no comparison, the second thing you do, which is not as good as reduction of risk, but you can ask for a guarantee. That's why a lot of used cars will give you a warranty, because warranty reduces the risk. Well, it doesn't really reduce the risk, but it reduces the risk to you. When you buy a warranty on the car, or if there's a 30-day, 90-day, 1 year guarantee to buy back the car, it doesn't make the car any more reliable, but it does mean if something happens to the car, you'll get your money back, or some of your money back, or it will get repaired. So that's reducing your risk, even though the underlying risk factor is not actually reduced. Lastly, if you can't get a reduction in the underlying risk and you can't get a warranty or guarantee to reduce your risk, you can ask for a discount. Because in everything in business, risk equals to value, or actually equals to negative value. So whenever there is a plus risk, there is a negative value. The higher the risk, the lower the value it is. So if you compare two identical cars side by side, one has a higher mileage and it has a higher risk. And that's why that car should have less value. So the price will be lower. So if you can get reduction, which is obviously ideal, you can't get a guarantee, you can go for a discount. So I hope that's a pretty simple session on both discussing the value and the strategy and the important factors that we should consider when we negotiate contracts. This leads us to this week's project. This week we will have you start to do part 1 of a venture investment transaction simulation. So the scenario is this: an ambitious startup company, which I assume some student had came up with, is looking to develop an augmented reality video game sort of similar to Fortnite. If you guys haven't played Fortnite before, it's pretty popular. Let's just say that it's a popular game that you can play augmented reality. This startup company is trying to raise capital to build a game. Now, this is important. We're assuming, let's say it's correct. We're assuming the cost of developing this game, I put it here, everything except labor and salary is $500,000. So this is a scenario of the simulation. You shouldn't think about that the cost to develop the game is more than $500,000. It's important to know that it's excluding labor and salary. So the people that are developing, the owners of the company or the members of the startup who are making this game are not yet getting paid. So the $500,000 covers the material and the hardware and everything else you need to develop the game. It wouldn't be more than 500. It's not less than 500. Let's say the 500 is accurate. So that's one side of the contract simulation. The other side is an investor. So a group of wealthy individuals, hey, you guys are wealthy. A group of wealthy individuals who have pulled together $5 million to invest in a startup company. $5 million. They pulled together means they put money together and they have $5 million on hand. They can invest in any kind of company they want. So under this scenario, both the company, the game company, the startup company, and the investor that we mentioned above have tentatively agreed to enter into a contract where the investor will invest money, any amount up to the money they have, which is $5 million, into the company. And this investment can be in any way they can agree to, equity or debt. If you guys remember, we discussed a couple weeks ago that equity investment means the investor become a part owner and owns a part of this company. So basically, the people that started the company is selling a small part of or a part of their company to the investor in exchange for money. Debt is a loan, of course. So that means borrowing the money and paying back at some point. So for next week, class, we will simulate in class the negotiate of the contract and its terms. So we'll reach a contract at the end of the class. However, how we're going to do is step one, you're going to pick one. You pick if you would like to be the company side or the investor side. And see on page 2 here, we have a demand worksheet, and you're going to circle company or investor. That's what you're going to choose. 2, you're going to develop 3 things you would like to demand in negotiation of this contract. So for each of the 3 things, clearly explain what you're asking for. Please use the worksheet on page 2, and we'll turn to it. Of course, the hint is that you can watch this presentation again to think about the in reference and explanation for the explanation of negotiation and this assignment. So here's the page 2, which is the demand worksheet. You are to choose 3 asks, 3 things you're going to ask for. You're going to put your name here, and you will print this, and you will submit this on Moodle, and you will also bring this in class. Make sure you circle company or investor. But here are some of the issues. How much capital would be invested into the company? This figure needs to be separated 2 ways: the cost of developing the game and the cost of labor. Remember, we said the cost of developing the game is $500,000. So the cost of labor, obviously, if you want to get paid, you should be more than that. 2 is how much equity should the investor receive? This is assuming equity financing. Of course, if you don't like equity financing, you don't have to choose this one. How much control, if any, should the investor receive? Recall just now we talked about so 1 and 2 deals with value, 3 deals with the control. Remember, I mentioned that the control is a very important consideration, so you should think it through and say how you can exercise control. And 4, how should the investors receive the return of their investment if the company is successful? Now, remember, if you did debt financing, you actually own a part of the company, so you don't necessarily receive anything in return, but you will share in the profit. However, if you did debt financing, that's equity financing. If you did debt financing, then you will have to get your money back through some sort of arrangement, pre-agreed arrangement, and that's where you're negotiating. Number 5, what happens if the company files for bankruptcy? There's some options here you can think through. Number 6, what happens if there are later investors to the company? Should the first investor to be able to cash out or block the later investors and invest for themselves? That's a consideration you should consider as well. Number 7, what happens if the company group members leave the company? Do they get to keep their individual ownership stake? That's also something that will get discussed a lot. And number 8, 9, and 10 is anything you want, as long as it's relating to the company and the investor. Make sure you remember which side you're on that you picked up here. So for next week, come to class prepared with 3 things that you're going to ask for with the specifics, and we'll go through all these factors, and then we'll discuss and negotiate in class based on which side you chose, and we'll end up with the contract at the end. Thank you, and please complete this by next week, and I will see you in class next week.